To say there's been a lot of discourse around Nintendo in 2025, in particular with the Switch 2 and how they're handling certain things, would probably be an understatement. We all have seen it in one form or another, be it some slight mentions on my channel, watching other content creators, being on various social medias. But beyond all of that, if you don't stay and live your life on social media and you're not a content creator, it is possible that you just haven't experienced some of this stuff. But we have seen at times some responses from within the industry to some of Nintendo's changes they've made this year. Now, most of these responses have come from other corporate people at other companies that would do things like defend the use of game key cards. And it makes sense from the corporate perspective because game key cards are more profitable than physical games. So you can understand why, from a corporate perspective, where you're trying to serve shareholders, that, yeah, you obviously like anything that leads to you making more money. But what we haven't really heard is from people that aren't up on the corporate level at a company. What about the people that are actually making the games? How do they feel about some of the things Nintendo are doing? And now we have heard from a former Capcom employee. This employee is still currently working in the game industry and composing music and all this stuff. They are well respected, and you've probably heard their music before in some of your favorite games from Capcom. But here's the thing. They have a very, very different perspective on this based on personalized experience over what Nintendo is doing, and they tend to find much of what Nintendo is doing as a positive. Now, one of the things they think that is a positive for Nintendo isn't really a positive for them, but actually Nintendo's trying to be a friend to other companies to help lift them up. It's very interesting, this perspective. And again, it's just one man's opinion, but it's an opinion that comes from knowledge of things that have happened within the industry. And I don't have that knowledge because I'm not a video game developer. So we're going to go off of what they have to say here and talk about it after I remind you, we are having 2 current giveaways at the moment. One giveaway is for 3 copies of Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, and the other giveaway is for 5 copies of Kirby Air Riders. We have links to enter the giveaway down in the description or the pinned comment, and let's go ahead and dive in on this because the employee we're talking about is Masakazu Kaizu, I can't pronounce these names, Sugamori. Again, a composer who's worked on franchises such as Ace Attorney and many others, and here's what he says about a lot of the discourse around Nintendo. Adding 1 point to the current flow of conversation, and this is a translation of Japanese by Grok, regarding the claim often heard overseas that seems to have some legitimacy. It's unfair that something you bought becomes unplayable when the service ends. As a player myself, I can understand this perspective, and I sometimes feel that same way. But, well, do physical items outside of digital products last forever? Most of the time, they don't, right? Physical things always have a lifespan and will eventually break. Digital products, on the other hand, generally don't have a lifespan. This is one major fundamental factor. Personally, I think Nintendo's moves have the following significance. Keycards. It offers measures against illegal copying, reducing the risk of holding inventory. Raising game prices. Waving the flag so that game companies struggling with recent inflation can raise prices. Terminating online services for older hardware, setting a lifespan. This makes it easier for companies to re-release games on new hardware, and to put it further, it creates the job of porting. So it has this kind of like secondary effect that jobs are being created because companies will port their games to new platforms. I feel that these moves are largely aimed at protecting the gaming industry and the digital entertainment industry. It might be a bit too optimistic of a view, but the fact is that Nintendo takes the lead. Other companies can more easily follow suit to protect themselves. Do you think a company that's already made that much profit would do this just to make even more money? Even if they stop selling everything right now, they have enough cash reserves to support all their current employees until retirement. It's so incredible, it's actually almost ridiculous. Again, Nintendo is a for-profit company that just has a massive bankroll and no debt. I feel that their focus is on how to move in a way that protects the industry. That's the sense I get. Now, obviously, some very controversial takes here. And so he did take a chance to respond to a couple of people that are against what he's talking about. And so let's get into those comments as well, because obviously his rebuttals might be relevant to what your rebuttals to him might be. So Jerzy Bartozowicz, I can't pronounce it better than that, said this: I love the music of Ace Attorney, because again, this guy made the music. So reading this made me sad. As a creator and artist, you should understand that taking away the right to use cultural works purchased legally from buyers leads to the disappearance of those works. Corporations are not on our side. You write about piracy, but games that are no longer sold and cannot be legally obtained, for example, due to expired licenses, are often preserved through piracy. The video game industry has long fought for games to be recognized as art, but we tend to treat them like fast food. We buy them, we play them, and buy again. And he says, thank you. Regarding the issue of purchased items becoming unusable due to service termination, as someone who plays games myself, I certainly have my own thoughts on the matter. With that in mind, let me offer a counter argument. We cannot demand that a company continues a service while forcing them to operate at a loss. And terminating an old service as a strategy to promote a new one, how is that any different than Apple phasing out an older iPhone model? Isn't that the same thing? So, from the perspective of a company, I can understand their position to a certain extent. And that's what I wrote about. Another point about piracy, I acknowledge that it serves the function as a library. However, there are two practical issues, aren't they? When old games are re-released on modern hardware, are they permanently removed from the quote-unquote library? Some of the library pirated games, they wouldn't be, right? Even for old games, it's not that there are no rights holders, it's just that the rights holders haven't re-released them. In fact, pirated versions can hinder official re-releases. Are people really not illegally copying current software? I recognize that if something can be copied, it is being copied. It's not a gray area. There are people who engage in outright illegal activities, and that's why it has to be deemed universally unacceptable by law. If you don't like that, then you yourselves should properly control piracy. I've seen moments where illegal copying nearly destroyed the gaming industry, and I've personally experienced damage from illegal copying. I know firsthand the harmful impact it has on the industry. I have absolutely no intention of condoning it. He goes on to say, concerns about piracy and server maintenance costs are understandable. The importance is that physical media doesn't come with such costs. Thanks to that, we can play most of the classic games from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Piracy is a more complex issue. This is because pirates generally always find ways to obtain games for free or at a very low cost. For example, there are websites that resell PC game keys. If the security of the Switch 2 is breached, pirates will likely be able to copy games released on keycards as well. They will always find a way. The worst part is that legitimate buyers end up suffering. I myself am a collector, but I also create gaming videos and released small indie games. I have a large collection of Nintendo Switch 1 cartridge games and have owned the Nintendo Switch 2 since its launch. But if the Switch 2 version uses keycards, I still prefer buying Nintendo Switch 1 packaged version. I think many other gamers feel the same way. My friends do too. And hey, greetings from Poland. This is a very respectful conversation. And he responds by saying, including those from outside Japan, pirated ROMs were widely circulated in Japan. And during the DS and 3DS eras, Japanese game companies suffered tremendous damage. You know about this, right? Even so, the fact that physical ROMs were made alongside digital versions up until now was, in my view, truly a matter of just the creator's pride. It's obvious that digital software, which can be addressed through account bans, is overwhelmingly easier to deal with when it comes to piracy. The gaming industry has been increasingly cornered by costs in recent years, so I think it's only natural that they've shifted in that direction. As one of the creators, rather than blaming that shift, I'd prefer people to blame the pirated copies caused by illegal copying. The gaming industry has to protect the next generation of the industry. Thus, the history of the industry can also be called the history of battling piracy. Because of this, legitimate users like yourself end up facing inconveniences. I think you're blaming the wrong target. Obviously, people continue to disagree with him. He doesn't really do any further responses. That's not the only point, though, that people are taking issue with. If we go back to his original tweet here and scroll down, he responds to another person down here. You know, There are Model A Fords, the first mass-produced automobile still running today, more than 100 years later. The oldest light bulb has been lit continuously in the Livermore Fire Station number 6 after more than 100 years. It says that common today as a classic car, it's quite a luxury vehicle, and it is if you still happen to own one that runs. While it's true that analog physical items can last longer if treated with care, seems like the associated costs are being ignored. And yeah, there's a lot of upkeep costs and everything else to keep that going. And he also said here, that said, we are in the gaming industry, are, after all, a luxury good business that gets cut from household budgets first and foremost. If we raise prices too much and people turn away, it does defeat the purpose. So naturally, we have to keep it moderate, right? LOL. There are plenty of rival entertainment content options out there these days, after all, but it really is a tough era. And he doesn't really say anything more than that. So he's saying, I sympathize with people that have a problem with the prices, but as someone that comes from within the industry, it's not so much that Nintendo needs all this extra revenue. Nintendo is doing great, but it doesn't mean all the companies they work with are. And those companies can't necessarily get away with the way things are done. Nintendo is still putting their games on physical copies. Key cards are not about Nintendo themselves. They're about their partners. And Nintendo enabling that and not giving other options for cartridges might sound so anti-consumer, but maybe the companies don't want those options. That is something that has never really been considered when we talk about how, well, it's Nintendo's fault for not giving 32 gigabyte and 16. How do you know the companies even want them? Right? So it's very interesting thinking about this perspective from inside the industry that there are like companies being legitimately hurt by piracy. No, it ain't the big dogs, the EAs, the Ubisoft, maybe Ubisoft's got a lot of problems, but Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, no, these companies in general, well, piracy is a big deal. And man, Nintendo games have had a lot of piracy problems. Nintendo's a very profitable entity. It's obviously not overall hurting their bottom line, but there are lots of smaller entities, indie titles, smaller teams at some of these big companies like Capcom or Square Enix that are being negatively impacted by all of this and watching job loss happen because of it, watching profit loss. And that just really irks them. These people that worked really hard on these games. And while piracy is argued to be for preservation, he does bring up that point. Hey, when we bring these games back, when we put them on a new system, does that pirated copy get taken off the internet? Of course it doesn't. So it continues to hurt the sale of re-releases of the games as well. And I understand the point obviously being made that, hey, companies are kind of treating games less as art and more like a consumer good. It's really an entertainment medium. Right? It's an entertainment medium, an optional one. And I do like here that he notes that, hey, it's a luxury good. Whether you want to call it that or not, when push comes to shove and all of us are dealing with real life BS, gaming is probably one of the first things we have to cut from our budgets, right? Maybe you could hold on to some of your classic stuff, maybe not. Personally, I used to have a massive collection of physical games. I used to also have a massive collection of Amiibo. Do you see like hundreds of Amiibo? Back here, you see a handful. Do you see hundreds of Amiibo? Do you see a massive stack of physical games? No, because when financial crisis hit me in 2019, before COVID hit, I had to sell everything. Gaming was the first thing to go. I had a family to support, right? So that backs up his point that like gaming is a luxury. It is not we're not entitled to it, right? I mean, we already get free games on our phone, but when it comes to console gaming, it's a luxury good. Luxury goods are expensive. And Nintendo is raising prices, and I get it. I think, looking from the consumer perspective, it looks so scummy because Nintendo is a $100 billion company. Why do they need even more money? But sometimes somebody's got to take the bullet so the ones under them can bring the prices up and do other things that ultimately end up benefiting them. And that's the way that this person views it. Now, he might have a great reverence, obviously, for Nintendo, being a Japanese developer, a lot of respect for Nintendo in Japan. And it's possible there's some biases and skews there, but he does talk about how he's like seen from experience behind the scenes, like some of these struggles and how what Nintendo is doing could actually impact positively the struggles that some of these development studios are having, at least in Japan, since that's where he has experience. So I do think that this is an interesting perspective. Now, for my overall thoughts here, I think it's tough. I think the whole world is going through some stuff, be it politically, be it religiously, be it financially, economically, health, right? We're all going through stuff. We have 9 billion people in the world, believe it or not. And I just, some people are healthy and rich and doing well, and some people are not. And all I can really say is, well, obviously these big companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, Nintendo, although Nintendo's much smaller than those companies, are not struggling. They're doing actually very well. That doesn't mean everything in the game industry is going well. Not just because of all the mass layoffs, that gets all the attention, but there's just so much other stuff and so many other ways people are being harmed that Nintendo is, at least according to this developer, leading the way to enable other development studios to do things that would actually end up benefiting them without getting the same sort of backlash. And it's weird because we're in a world where Silksong bucked all these trends and dropped for $20, which technically is a price increase over Hollow Knight. It is funny how much we praise Silksong for being $20. They raised the price. Hollow Knight launched at $15. It's more expensive than Hollow Knight was. So like they also raised the price and they're being viewed as a good guy for it. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? They raised the price by 25% for their sequel, but they're being praised for that. Isn't that fascinating? It's almost as if our biases for how good we presume a product is comes into play in what we think the price of that product should be. I've seen many people say that product could have easily been twice as much, could have been $40. You wouldn't have said that for the original Hollow Knight. It was $15. See, it's very fascinating that they technically raised the price as well. And it actually plays into what he said. Their price raise seems good, and they're not getting backlash for it. Not because just the game is great, but because other companies are doing much more expensive games like $80 Mario Kart. It makes this game feel like a better value, even though they also increase the price. Some food for thought about how Nintendo might be kind of taking some bullets for their partner developers to actually ultimately make more money. And in this economy, that is a big deal, especially for some of these smaller studios like Team Cherry. Anyways, we'll see, obviously, how this all shakes out. Ultimately, when you raise prices and you do the things Nintendo's doing, like with Amiibo and with the games and the key cards, it's the market that determines everything. So I can have my personal opinions on things. You can hate it. You can love it. But the bottom line is the market's going to determine if this stuff is all right. And we already have some initial sales in. Looks like the initial sales data looks positive, but will that sales data continue through the holidays and into next year and show that game key cards and all the rest are here to stay? I'm not a big fan of game key cards, but an all digital future's coming. I don't know if you guys pay attention a lot to rumors outside of Nintendo. There's supposedly a state of play, according to Nate the Hate, coming next week. But the biggest rumor out there for PlayStation is that PlayStation 6 is going to have multiple SKUs. None of those SKUs actually come with a disk drive. They will be selling an optional attachable disk drive, but none of them actually come with it. So when you think you're getting mad at Nintendo, right? Oh, game key cards, they're so bad. They're just digital copies. PlayStation's about to basically eliminate physical games. Not literally, but practically. Like, this is how it started with PC. PC started selling without disk drives. Sure, the physical PC games still exist, but like, come on. Like 99% digital purchases. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Nathaniel Reveljans from Nintendo Prime. Let me know your thoughts on this down below. This is actually one of our topics we'll be talking about on the podcast tomorrow. And we actually have some game developers coming on the show. So I think this is a very interesting podcast tomorrow because we're going to get some opinions of game developers on this very thing. Catch you guys then.